Right, good morning, everyone. We'll make a start, if that's okay. My name's Mike Hayward, and I work for the Cybersecurity Centre of the Isle of Man, which is part of the Isle of Man Government's Office of Cybersecurity and Information Assurance. I hope, as many of you know, we run an annual cybersecurity conference called CYBERISLE. We've done it for 5 years now, and what we would like to do this morning, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jeff Ames from CND, Christian Goltz from RAILA, Guy Hudson from Deloitte, and Steve Douglas from Synapse. And we just want to run through some of the themes and that came out of this year's CYBERISLE, and much more generally in terms of themes that are coming across. We will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the panel discussion, but if anyone wants to interject, the purpose of this really is to just have a discussion and to just really sort of share information and ideas. So there's no prescribed presentation here, so happy to take questions at the end, or if you feel strongly or want to ask something in the middle of a conversation, put your hand up and I'll get to you. So without further ado, we've got a couple of themes that came up in this year's CYBERISLE, and one of them really was around whether we consider ransomware still to be the biggest cyber threat. So if I could start with you, Jeff, is that something that you would agree with? Oh, I need to just...
Lights on. Well,
yeah,
it is working. So it's just taking a while to sink in. Yeah, ransomware is one of the biggest threats out there right now. Are we seeing examples of it? Yeah. And the biggest thing with ransomware is the speed of response. Yeah. So we've had people come to us and say, "Oh, I've got a problem with ransomware. So what are the signs and symptoms have you got?" And they said, "We've got this big notice on the screen demanding this." "How long have you had that then?" "Oh, I've had it for a week." I'm just like, oh, right, so you've had it for a week. I think things are pretty desperate now. So one of our big things with everybody is just to promote it, to get everybody aware, the speed of reaction. What do they do in those initial minutes, of actually getting attacked by ransomware? What do they do? How do they do it? Now, all of this is, we promote practicing all your instant procedures and be aware of it, because the last thing you want to be doing is running around like a headless chicken going, "Oh my God, what do I do? Yeah, we've been attacked."
Christian, anything you would add on that?
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. I mean, it's a preparation, because it's not if, it's a when. And we talk to a lot of companies on the island. A lot of companies on the island think, "Oh, we'll be fine because we're on the island and we leave our doors open." So, but when it happens, it's too late. You can't decrypt it anymore, and so if you haven't got a backup, if you haven't got a plan to kind of stop it or mitigate it, then there's not much anyone can do. Yeah. And we've had companies that had to go back on 5-6 month old backups, and trying to survive on that is very, very tough.
Okay, Guy, have I passed you? Well, from your perspective, ransomware?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the other thing to consider is, what is it they're trying to do with your data? What's the reason they've tried to get hold of it? Is it because they do want to conduct ransomware, and is it that they're after money? But what might the other motives be? If you consider, if you take this potentially away from an FS scenario, but maybe consider ESG sustainability, some people are out there just to create anarchy. They just want to ruin you as an organization. So it might not be that there's a financial incentive. If it was an environmentalist, they might just want to try and ruin Shell, for instance. So it's worth considering if their motive is purely financial or whether there's another driver behind that.
Steve, from the companies you talk to, is that some of the concerns they have?
Yeah, hi everyone. Quick thank you for not being upstairs listening to Jason. He's world class, isn't he? So we're all downstairs. The thing about ransomware is, I'm not a technical person. I presume everybody in the room knows what ransomware, what we're talking about, right? So this isn't people stealing your data. They're leaving it where it is, and they're just encrypting it. Okay, so they're locking you out of your own data. So it's what makes your business important. And what we find is that there's a couple of things you can do to protect yourself. So you can close the doors and you can never let anybody in. It's a bit like COVID. Okay, if you lock your doors of your house and you never leave your home again, you're probably quite safe, and your systems are the same. But we were talking upstairs about a connected island, making sure that everybody has access to everything. It would be ridiculous to try and lock yourself out. So I think what I talk to customers about and what our business speaks about is, what do you do if the inevitable happens? Because we all think, as was already said, either we're not a target because we're businesses based on the Isle of Man or with an Isle of Man element, so nobody's heard of us, or we're not big enough, we're not a brand, or we're too clever. Well, if you look at the companies that are in the news for having ransomware attacks, believe me, their IT departments are clever. They've put safeguards in place. They've probably invested more than the people in this room on protecting their businesses. So what we generally say is it may well happen to you. It could well happen. What do you do afterwards? How long can your business sustain being without its data? How is your reputation going to be hurt with your customers or the people that you deal with, your suppliers? What do you do in those moments afterwards? Who do you contact? What do you say? What messages do you use? And then really importantly, how do you get your business up and running again without having to pay a huge amount of money to somebody who may or may not give you your data? They might not give it back. Or if they do and they decrypt it, does it look the same as it did before they started? So really we're about having conversations around protecting yourself and making sure that your business continuance can happen regardless of the threats that are happening around the world.
Guy, maybe if you pick up on that, I mean, I think you do quite a bit of work on resilience, is that right, in terms of...
Yeah. I think it's, how can you embed resilience within an organization so that you can withstand the impact or a threat like that? And a lot of this will come down to training. It will come down to running scenario testing. It will come down to rehearsal, because what you're looking for really is that if something does go bang, you're not reacting to it, you're responding because you're ready and you've put the right mitigations in place for you to be able to recover from that scenario should it happen. And this all comes down to repetition, ensuring that the people in your team firstly know what those first steps are. When that instance happens, they know who to talk to, they know what their contingency plans are. And that all comes down to scenario testing, ensuring you have the right intelligence, ensuring that you have the right people in the right places to respond to these situations should they happen.
Christian, would you say that resilience is something that's in a good place in the Isle of Man, or from your experience, how are you seeing in terms of some of the threat?
I don't think it's where we would like it to be. I think a lot of companies still struggle with IT and cybersecurity being two different, industries and experts. A lot of people, the Isle of Man runs a lot on relationships, so they trust the IT provider to just, we've used them for 20 years, that's what we do, but they don't actually do cybersecurity, so, and they wouldn't think about it necessarily, and they wouldn't give you the resilience you would need today. And so I think it's important that, because the boards often don't have technical expertise, to reach out, to some experts they trust and say, look, can you help me with this? And often this is not expensive. It's just configuring the right systems and implementing some more systems, but it doesn't break the bank to be resilient.
I mean, Jeff, from your experience, are there things that you hear people say, well, I wish I'd thought of this before rather than after?
Well, we always usually say to a customer, it would have been good if you'd come to us before you'd been attacked, so we could have helped you prepare. But I think one of the big quotes I always remember is, we were working on an incident and the engineer was working with us for some time, actually could make sure the customer was still operating, still working, make sure there was no artifacts left behind. Where he said, you made me think of working in a completely different way. As a normal network engineer, I did not consider some of the things you've taught me over the last few months.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you feel that the attacks are becoming more sophisticated then?
For the ones that we're seeing right now, they're doing a lot of research. Yeah. So one of the things we say is, make sure you understand what information you're putting out there on the internet, on social media, in the news, because it will be used against you. Especially now that the big conversation today upstairs is about AI. Yeah. We used to be able to spot the phishing emails because the English used to be appalling. Yeah. And then it started to get a little bit better. Now they're using AI to generate it. It's very hard to spot the differences in the language. So you've got to go through the technical checks of the emails to see whether you're expecting where they come from. As Guy mentioned, it's training. You have to train your staff. Yeah. But yes, on the island, we're seeing proper targeted attacks. And I think one of the things that we're actually seeing is they're going for the third parties. Yeah. So one of the things we advise people is, do you go and check what resilience measures the companies you work with have actually put in place? Yeah. There's been a number of examples on the island already, yeah, where the third party has actually caused the other business to be, what's the best way? Services unavailable for a certain amount of time. And it wasn't actually their fault. It was actually the third party.
Yeah. Guy, I was going to maybe ask you in terms of, Jeff mentioned there the training. Are you seeing good sort of training programs, or what things do you think particularly work?
I think, yeah, across industry, you'll see organizations conducting pen testing, you'll see organizations conducting scenario testing. But a bit like Jeff was just saying there about sort of trying to stay one step ahead of the attacker, it's understanding what those attacks will look like, and therefore actually being able to run tests that aren't just going through the motions and going through the steps. It's ensuring that you've actually got the right intelligence, the right scenario, understanding what triggers you need to look for, and actually making sure that, right, if this happens, Dave is going to deal with that scenario. Okay, what if Dave's not there? And that's something we've often seen, that there's a plan in place with a certain number of people who understand how to deal with the situation when it happens, but it's ensuring you've got secondary, third, and a number of contingencies to deal with that when it happens. But for me, it comes down to the scenario. It's the education across the organisation and actually understanding what that situation will look like when it unfolds. And I think equally going to the third parties, it's looking at the wider ecosystem, understanding, as Jeff said, who else is involved, who else are you affiliated with, who else is part of your organisation, and then considering, I think particularly for this room, how do you become more resilient as an organisation and as a community? How can you support each other, and how can you work together, conducting testing across more than one organisation, and also bringing your third parties into that testing as well?
Steve, I mean, that last point there from Guy could sound quite daunting, I suppose, in terms of the amount of effort that might be required. Have you had any experience of sort of companies sort of going, well, we want to do something, but it feels like there's quite a lot to do, so where would we start?
Yeah, clearly everybody on this panel is talking about prevention and mitigation, aren't they? Nobody's up here saying we can lend you some money to pay to these guys to get your data back. And that's really the thing. So there's a few things you should do. There's good due diligence. Teach your people how to recognize emails that they shouldn't click on and that kind of thing. Because let's be clear on this as well. It's probably quite rare that somebody's going to hack in, right? It's quite hard to hack in. You've got to try and get past firewalls, levels of security, monitoring. There's all sorts of things that are in place. It's much easier to send an email and hope that somebody will click on it and that it'll connect outwards, right? Or put some kind of payload on your network, and that's the start of it. So just to be absolutely clear, that's the most likely. It's social engineering. You in the old days, you would have dropped something in the car park of the office saying the CEO's salary details for 2024. Within 5 minutes, somebody will pick that up and they'll put it into a machine. It's exactly the same now. There's all sorts of things you can put into an email and somebody in your business will click it, no matter how clever you think they are. So we talk about things with our customers like air gaps, like clean rooms, which sound very exotic, but if you think about it, it's like the old days of taking copies of your data and putting it somewhere else. And we had an example recently with one of our customers that they're a global operation. They've got businesses all over the world, and it was supply chain to the point that was made. So they didn't get hacked. One of their suppliers got hacked. So supply chain comes in. By just being downstream, our customer was locked out of their data and the ransomware demand came. First interesting thing was that they demanded $1 million, which is a nice round number, isn't it? And the customer went back to them actually, and just to see whether it was real, and said, if we offered you 100,000, would you take it? And the answer was yes. So that was quite interesting, just as a by the by. Negotiation is obviously key in these situations. But the other thing is that the UK subsidiary of this particular German customer had an air gap. So although all of their systems were encrypted, all of their important data was encrypted, and the ransom was demanded, they had an air gap and they had a copy of their data. So they said, okay, well, we can live for 24 hours. We can tell all of our customers that this has happened. The customers credit card details and billing details and personal GDPR type information has not been stolen. It's just been encrypted in place. And actually what we're going to do is turn all of that stuff off and turn some more things up over here. And in 24 hours, we'll be up and running again. So that was a really good story for them. Really good story. And actually looking at the rest of the business around the world, they hadn't rolled that out. They'd only done it in the UK, and the UK looked great. They were up within 24 hours. So it's that mitigation. It's that, yeah, okay, it's going to happen. We're not infallible. What do we do in that situation, and how long can we survive? And what, as I said earlier, do we say to the customers? Admit there's a problem. There's no point lying to your customers. They'll just go somewhere else and feel uncomfortable.
Christian, I was going to ask you, in terms of your experience, that question of ransomware and the topic of do you pay or do you not pay? Where would you sort of find yourself in terms of your experience on that point?
Yeah, we had them more often than we like, those conversations, and I think obviously you wouldn't advise to pay. You've got to try to not pay if you can. That's where the backups come in.
Yeah.
You say, I actually don't need that, and I've got backup and I can bring that back up. But we've had customers that wouldn't have been able to open the doors again the next day because they didn't have a backup. They didn't have anything, no access to any documents, not even PDF files, no emails. And they asked me, what do I do? And I said, I can't advise you to pay, but if it was my business, I would try to get that data back, because I don't know what it was like $10,000, $20,000, and they would have had the money. And it's an option. You try to get it back, you pay them if you can afford it, and you hope for them to be, honest enough to get your data back. And they did. And so they got the data back, they restored it, and they're still in business, and no one knows, the business that happened to. So, but it could have gone the other way. So if it's your business, you have to think about 50 years of family-owned business. Do you want to let that go for £10,000-20,000?
Yeah. Jeff, just linked to that and connected to the point Steve was making about the financial impact. People have talked previously about having insurance for this type of event. Again, how has that played out in terms of some of the things you've seen?
I think it's quite interesting to see the actual change of the stance of insurance companies over the last few years. Whereas it used to be, yes, we'll cover you for cyber insurance, not a problem. That has completely changed. I actually look at some of the question sets that the companies send in, and I have to help my customers go through them, because it's like going through a compliance audit. Do you do this? Do you change your admin passwords? Do you restrict access to this? Once you've gone through that, I reckon a lot of them could actually pass an ISO 27001 audit. It's that in depth, and that this is where it's changed, and the insurance companies have changed their stance on it completely.
Right.
And going back to Christian's point, is you can't always trust these hackers. Yeah, they're in this to make money. Yeah, and they've got such a business model now. Actually, the people actually negotiating with you are not the people that actually sent the phishing email or did the phishing attempt. Yeah, they're actually got different departments dealing with this, and they don't always trust each other. So you can't always guarantee that when you pay the ransom, you will get the encryption key, and whether that encryption key will work properly.
Okay. I'm just thinking about the time. How are we doing, Jiz? Are we still okay for? Yeah. Okay. Just Guy, coming back to your point of view, I mean, advising companies around this, are you getting involved at the point before or after that they had an attack?
Yeah, a bit before. And I think going back to the previous points about, whether you've got an air gap, whether you've got an ability to isolate, whether you have a clean room. I think the reporting shows these days that organizations that do sort of 70 to 75% are less likely to be attacked, because the attacker is aware that they'll have their data isolated and stored somewhere else, and actually therefore the implication isn't as big on them. So I think there's the two sides to it. There's the mitigations you can put in place, but then again, you need an organization, and this is going back to the training, that understands how to conduct that process of isolating your data, putting it somewhere secure, and making sure that that's conducted on a regular basis, and it's either automated where it can be, or at least you have workarounds if that can't be done. It's the mitigation first, and then it's all the points that have already been made about once that ransomware attack happens, you have the right people in the right place to conduct the steps to deal with that.
And there is a view sometimes that the cyber criminals are opportunistic, shall we say. So they're just looking for any door that happens to be open. So advice for the room in terms of, it may not be a target attack. It may just be you're one of thousands that happens to have the same vulnerability and they just happen to walk in your door. Is that something we're seeing?
I think it's that previous point. It's education, and there's an individual somewhere that's going to click on an email that you don't want them to click on. So it's about then having those steps in place to deal with that when it happens. And it is a sad reality. It's not if, but when. So it's again, I'm slightly repeating myself here, but it's the mitigation previously, and then having the right steps in place to manage the situation if it does unfold.
Okay, thank you. I just wondered at this point if there were any questions from the room for the panel. Yes, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Working. At the beginning, it's a little bit technical, but maybe you can give a quick and dirty advice. I was said at the beginning that if it's happening, so you get attacked, and there's a question how quickly you do react. So how can you react, and on the technical basis, how is it spreading inside your system? So what can you avoid if you can say something quickly to it?
Okay, so it depends on the actual structure of your systems, whether it's virtual or physical. If you're talking about a desktop sat on a piece of desk, the first thing you do is pull the network cable out. Okay, but this is where all of us have talked about having processes and procedures in place to identify the immediate actions that you take, and everyone should be aware of them. And this is why we talk about exercising and training, etc., etc. So, yeah, if you've got a virtual infrastructure, yeah, you should be able to have a monitoring system up there and actually know if something's going wrong with something, and you can actually see it escalating through the system when you need your engineers to isolate those boxes and drop them very quickly. So each system is slightly different, and that's why you need to go through and review your system and work out from the best guidance that you can get what actions that you take.
Any other questions?
I'll do a nice, easy question. Should the government be doing more to mandate cybersecurity? Like, if you think about, for us, it's logical being in the cybersecurity space that you would have something in place. But there's a lot of companies that have nothing, no antivirus, no backups or anything else. And this is coming back to the economy. So should they be enforcing some kind of minimum standards so that at least companies have to abide by some kind of cybersecurity? Easy question.
I'll tell you, it's an easy question, this, isn't it? They've started, haven't they? So the National Cybersecurity Centre have created a institution called IASME, okay, which is the Institute for Information Assurance for Small to Medium Enterprises. Okay, so anybody working with government enterprises across in the UK have to pass a minimum set of standards before they're allowed to do business. That is starting to populate through the Isle of Man as well. As you're well aware, you're a certification body as well. Yeah, and it's these types of agencies and this type of work which eventually I think will become a standard that everyone has to adhere to. At the moment, it's voluntary. Yeah, and it's usually to do with what kind of contracts that you've got. If you've got anything to do with government, that you have to go through it. But it's, from our point of view, it's actually a very good stamp to actually put on your website to say, I've gone through this check. I've got this green tick. Yeah, and this is down to very small companies, yeah, can actually go and do this all the way up to, I mean, I know the title says small to medium enterprises, but they've actually designed the standard now to go to very large, but it's actually quite difficult for them to do it. They're probably better to go through other security frameworks. It's all about giving confidence to the customers to show that they've actually gone through these checks. So if you see somebody with ISO 27001 stamp, you know they've gone through a serious amount of work to make sure that they've got everything in place.
If I maybe just on a slightly different angle, the Isle of Man government is looking to bring in what they're calling is the National Infrastructure Security Bill. There'll be a consultation on that in the next few weeks with a view to sort of seeing whether some standards like that should be introduced, or obviously with a view initially to sort of the national and critical national infrastructure on which a lot of what we use relies. But it's a direction that Europe, UK, elsewhere are sort of recognizing that there maybe does need to be a common assurance framework. And if you watch that space, there's a lot of discussion both in the UK government and elsewhere about what is actually part of the national infrastructure now that we're all in digital and we're relying on network services. So I think there'll be more to come in that space, Kurt.
And I was just going to add, there's, from a UK perspective or a European perspective, things like the operational resilience requirements, the Digital Operation Resiliency Act from Europe, there's a lot of good information and compliance requirements that are already in those legislations that can be used to leverage and understand what requirements you can go through to ensure that your either IT or operational capabilities or your cyber capabilities are resilient as they can be. So that's quite a good place to look as well.
Yeah. And it will have many common sort of aspects to financial services or other areas where there's an assurance framework and there are certain standards. So if you're used to, as the Isle of Man is, working to, whether it's compliance frameworks or AML frameworks, it's a similar sort of principle in terms of how do you know we're all working to a common standard, and that you can rely on some of the core services to be at an acceptable standard. I think that was it. Thank you very much, everybody.